Hey, first grade families, it's Mrs. O'Hare again. I'm back with Dump the Chump. I'd like to read chapter 3 to you. I hope you're doing well. Today is Wednesday, April 1st. It's April Fool's Day. And I thought about teasing you and telling you, guess what, we're going back to school tomorrow. But I thought we'd probably all cry when I said that wasn't true. Some would be happy, some would be sad. But anyway, I hope you're having a good day. And this is called step number 2, but it's actually chapter 3 in Dump the Chump. And please excuse the dog noises in the background. After I left the Henson's house, I went right home to get ready for step number 2. I was pretty excited about how well things were going, but I didn't want to rush into a second step of my plan too quickly. If I did, I knew I could blow the whistle on the whole thing. I needed time to think. As soon as I walked in the door, my mother asked, "Home so soon, Oscar? What happened?" "Nothing happened," I answered, trying to sound normal. "I think I'll just go up to my room for a while." "Why? Do you feel ill?" Now, this is another thing that really kills me about my mother. For some reason, she seems to think that as long as I'm outside, I'm healthy. But as soon as I want to come inside, I'm sick. It just doesn't make any sense. If being inside means you're sick, then my mother must be sick all the time. "I feel fine, Mother," I said. "Just fine." Then I ran up to my room and locked the door. Once it was locked, I checked the closet and the windows to make sure no one was spying on me. Checking the windows may sound like a strange thing to do since my room is on the second floor, but with a sneak like Robert around, you can't be too careful. One time, about a year ago, my mother went out shopping to buy me some new underwear. When she came home, she asked me to go up to my room and try it on. She wanted to make sure it was the right size. I really didn't want to, but once when she bought me underwear, the leg holes were too big, and when I wore them to school, Joanne Riley told the whole class that every time I climbed the rope, she could look right up my shorts and see everything. So since then, I decided that if my mother wanted me to try on new underwear, I'd be happy to do it. Anyway, that day, while I was in my room trying on underwear, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. And to tell you the truth, I looked pretty good. I got the chair from my desk and carried it back over to my dresser. Then I stood on the chair so I could get a better look at myself. I thought, those old leg muscles aren't too bad either. I started flexing. Remember we talked about this? It's like showing your muscles. I started flexing. Sorry, I got to figure out where I was. I looked pretty good. Okay. I thought I started flexing. That's when the laughter started. It was coming from outside my window. I look over and there, standing on a ladder, staring right into my bedroom, was dumb Robert. "Va va va voom," he shouted, roaring at the top of his lungs. And then he whistled at me. I was so mad at Robert, I must have gone crazy for a minute, because the next thing I knew, I was running down the stairs and right out the front door into the yard. I caught Robert just as he was on the third step of the ladder. I wasted no time in pulling him all the rest of the way down, and then I clobbered him as fast as I could. Robert screamed so loud that Mr. and Mrs. Farley from next door came running out of their house to see what was going on. That's when I realized I was still in my underwear. I was so embarrassed I didn't know what to do, and neither did the Farleys, so we just stood there staring at each other for a minute. Finally, I kind of just waved at them and said, "Hi there, Mr. and Mrs. Farley. How do you like my new underwear?" Mrs. Farley didn't answer. She just shook her head real disgustedly and walked back into the house. Mr. Farley took a few steps in my direction and put his hands on his hips. "Oh, for heaven's sakes, Oscar, don't you think you're rather old to be running around the neighborhood in your panties?" Panties? That guy actually called my boy underwear panties. I've never really forgiven Mr. Farley for that. Anyway, after that, I turned around and went back inside. Robert was in the kitchen crying. I guess I must have clobbered him harder than I thought. My mother was waiting for me in the hallway. Wow, I thought, I am really going to get it now. But my mother surprised me. I guess when she saw how ridiculous I looked standing there in my underwear, she figured I had already been through enough. Instead of yelling, she just walked over to me, snapped the elastic waistband, and said, "Nice fit, Oscar. You're becoming quite a snappy dresser." And she snapped me again. Well, the whole point of this story is that when you have a brother like Robert, you've got to be very careful. And that's why I checked the closet and the windows before I pulled out my notebook containing my secret plans for Operation Dump the Chump. When I sat down on my bed and I opened the notebook to page 1, I took a pencil and made a check mark besides step number 1, which was tell Hansons that Robert needs a home. Then I looked over the rest of the steps to my plan. There were 8 in all. I'll read them, but I just wanted you to see how they listed them. Step number 1, tell Hansons that Robert needs a home. Step 2, tell parents that the Hansons need a boy. Step 3, put a fake advertisement in the paper from the Hansons. Step 4, show fake ad to parents. Step 5, put fake advertisement in paper from parents. Step 6, show fake ad to the Hansons. 7, write fake letter to the Hansons. 8, write fake letter to the parents. I laughed with excitement as I read my plans over and over again. "Oscar, old boy, you're a genius, a real genius," I said out loud. I reread step number 2, tell parents that Hansons need a boy. This wasn't going to be quite as easy as the first step had been. I knew that if I wanted to, my mother could ask 1,000 or more questions about Mr. Henson. This time I had to be ready for anything. I got right to work. First, I wrote down everything I planned to say. Next, I made a list of all the dumb questions I thought my mom might ask. Then, I studied it carefully. I guess I must have been working on it longer than I thought, because before I knew it, I heard her calling for me for lunch. I took a deep breath and I was ready. "Where's Robert?" I asked as I sat down to eat my lunch alone. "Oh, he called and asked if he could eat over at the Bradfords'," my mother said. Perfect. Robert wouldn't be back for a while, and I had my mother all to myself. I sat there, not saying a word, as I ate my sandwich. Pretty soon, my mother said, "You're awfully quiet, Oscar. Is something the matter? Are you upset?" I knew it. I knew she'd ask me that. I had even planned it. She can't stand it when I'm quiet. According to my mother, if you come inside, you're sick, and if you don't feel like talking, you're upset. "Come on, tell me what's bothering you," she said again. "Oh, I don't know," I said, sounding really unhappy. "I was just sitting here thinking about poor Mrs. Henson. Geez, was I ever good at this? I could be an actor." "You mean Mrs. Henson from down the street? Did something happen to her?" "Well, not exactly," I said slowly. "It's just that she's telling me about some problems she's been having lately." "Problems? What kind of problems?" my mom asked. "Well, it's just that Mr. Henson is getting pretty old now, and Mrs. Henson says he's not as strong as he used to be. She told me that sometimes he needs a little help getting around." "Did Mr. Henson fall and break something?" she asked. "Is he ill? Are you saying that he can't walk?" "No, Mom," I answered. "Mr. Henson didn't fall or anything. It just seems that his bones aren't as strong as they used to be, and he can't move around very well. That's why I feel sorry for Mrs. Henson. She has to do about everything all by herself, and she told me how tired she's been getting lately. That's all." My mother kept up with more questions. "When did you talk to Mrs. Henson about this, Oscar?" she asked. Why did she tell you all those things? Was she upset or something?" Okay, I answered. "I guess I might as well tell you the whole story." Excuse me. "I saw Mrs. Henson outside this morning. She looked really sad, like she had been crying or something. So I stopped and I asked her, was something the matter?" That's when she told me the stuff about her husband. All she kept saying is how tired she was and how nice it would be if they had a boy around the house to help out with the chores. But Mrs. Henson said that they just don't have enough money to hire anyone. That's funny, my mother said right away. They had enough money to fly to Hawaii for Christmas last year. They can't be that poor. Oh no, I could have kicked myself. I'd forgotten all about the Hensons going to Hawaii. I felt myself beginning to panic again. Well, Mrs. Henson told me that when they were in Hawaii, a hula girl broke into their room and stole all their money. It sounded dumb, but it was better than nothing. And it's really a shame, I continued, because Mrs. Henson said that it was all of their life savings they had. It's lucky that they had already bought their return plane tickets. Otherwise, they probably would have had to spend the rest of their lives as beach bums in Hawaii. My mother just stood there looking at me for a minute. I had a feeling she didn't buy the whole story, so I hurried to get onto another subject. Anyway, I said, poor Mrs. Henson really does need help, Mom. Before I left today, she told me she didn't think her poor old back could hold up much longer, especially when she has to keep dragging Mr. Henson around the house all night. Dragging? What do you mean, dragging? My mother asked. Oh, I forgot to tell you, Mrs. Henson told me that sometimes at night, when Mr. Henson is especially tired, she has to drag him wherever he wants to go. Sometimes she drags him to dinner, and then later she drags him upstairs to bed. It must really be hard on her. Oh, no, said my mother. I knew that dragging stuff would get to her. This is just terrible, Oscar. She paused for a second. She continued with a very puzzled look on her face. But if what you're saying is true, I wonder what Mr. Henson was doing outside working in his garden this morning. I saw him when I took Robert to baseball practice. This is one of the questions I was ready for. Well, Mrs. Henson told me that he has good days and bad days. I answered. She was telling me that one day last week, Mr. Henson thought he felt well enough to work in his garden, but when he bent over and started to weed, he got so tired that he flopped over and took a nap right there in the middle of his vegetables. She said he squished a whole row of squash. My mother looked very confused and worried, but she didn't ask any more questions. She just stood there shaking her head the same way Mr. Henson had been doing. Meanwhile, I finished the rest of my lunch and got up to leave. The second step of Operation Dump the Chump was almost completed. Only one more thing needed to be said. As I was walking away, I mumbled something to myself. What did you say, honey? Asked my mom. She really couldn't stand it when somebody mumbles around her. Oh, nothing, I answered. It's just I was thinking about how much Robert has always liked those Hensons. It's funny, but the Hensons must really like him, too. Do you know that what Mrs. Henson said when I was leaving today? No, what? My mother said, concerned. She said, Oscar, please don't tell anyone what I've told you about this. And most of all, please don't tell your little brother Robert. That Robert's always such a happy little boy, and we would hate to upset him with news like this. He must be such a joy to your parents. That's what she said, Mom. She called Robert a joy. My mom didn't say anything, but I could tell she was thinking. Well, I guess I better go back outside for a while, I said. Maybe I'll run down to Henson's and see if I can be any help. Quickly, I left the kitchen and went out the back door. I ran down the stairs, and when I got far enough away from the house, I jumped up in the air and shouted, Whoa! 2 steps down and 6 to go, and then it's goodbye, Robert. We'll read another chapter tomorrow. Have a good night.